So, Ginny, teach us.
Okay, so I'm going to go a different path from the science, biological world, and we're going to talk about us, Asian Americans, but not us in this generation, but before World War II. Okay, so basically what I'm going to say is that Asian Americans today obviously have more priorities than Asian Americans from before World War II or after World War II as well. The third, fourth generations have more advantages than our ancestors or our history had before. We have to realize that our ancestors were our people of the past had struggled, and they had to achieve the American dream by going through hard toil. And I'm going to explain to you guys how Asian Americans were before pre-World War II. Okay. So some of the similarities that Asian immigrants had when they came into World War II in order to support their family back in Asia were that they were mostly male because they needed strong people to work for labor. Number two, they were working class and they also did unskilled labor. Number three, they're mainly sojourners. And what sojourners mean is that they come temporarily to the American land and they try to make as much money as they can, and then they return to their homeland to support their family. So eventually, it's not they're permanently staying in America, they're just temporarily staying there to make as much money to support. The fifth one is that there was a lot of groups that immigrated. There were Chinese, and then Japanese, and then the Korean, and then the Filipinos next. And number six, they were considered aliens, meaning that they were ineligible for U.S. citizenship. So no matter how long they stayed in the U.S. and no matter how much money they made, they were still considered as others. So that discrimination was prevalent during this era. And an important term that relates to number six is Orientalism, which means that basically the Asian immigrants were considered as others, so not as a whole. So they're discriminated from the other white Americans in the U.S. The differences were that the Filipinos were considered U.S. nationals because the Philippines was part of the U.S. territory, so they didn't need work visas to come into U.S. And number two, Japanese people, they actually had a lot of families whole families come to the U.S. Because of the Gentleman's Agreement, which I will explain. Alright, so starting off, I'm going to start off with Chinese immigrants. So for the Chinese immigrants, most of them were laborers. They were submissive. They were doing a lot of services. They began to build their work by doing the agriculture industry in California and during the gold rush. But during the gold rush, because so many Chinese immigrants came at the same time and there was a big rush and influx, the Americans thought that it was unfair for them to take over all their spots, especially the American class workers after the Civil War, because after the Civil War they needed to find jobs, American military, but they thought the Chinese were taking over all their jobs, so they considered it unfair and too much for them to handle. So they were considered a threat and inferior, which is related to the yellow peril, meaning that Americans thought that the Chinese immigrants were a threat to their economy. In 1882, the Americans, the American government passed the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which forbade free entry of working class of Chinese laborers. So basically, the immigration was limited, and not that many Chinese laborers were able to come over. So there's a political cartoon where basically Uncle Sam is looking over the Chinese laborers, and the Chinese laborers are portrayed as African Americans. So it portrays the meaning of slavery and how they were working under these unprivileged conditions. The next one is Japan, and Japan is a little bit different from the Chinese immigrants because they were welcomed initially, but became too big and too powerful for the Americans to handle. Kind of the same situation as the Chinese. However, the Gentleman's Agreement of 1907 was a little bit different. So Japan and the US came to their own version of the Chinese Exclusion Act. However, the Japanese immigrants had more priorities. Japan and the US agreed to stop the immigration of Japanese people, but they agreed to give fair rights to the Japanese already in America, which is different from the Chinese. And one of the main factors, main priorities of the Gentleman's Agreement was that they were able to bring in their wives. So they were able to bring their family over to in America to start off a family. And this was able to happen because Japanese had more leeway after the Russo-Japanese War after they proved to the US that they were militarily powerful and they had industrialized further. Okay, and then next is the Filipinos who came late during the 1920s. They didn't have a visa, but they had no visa, but they also didn't have the citizen rights either. So they were considered nationals, I explained before. So although they were part of the US territory, they were not considered Americans. The Tydig-McDuffie Act of 1934 revoked the right of free entry to limit the number of Filipinos coming into the United States. So again, all three of them relate to how America was trying to stop immigration so that they could prosper on their own for their own white Americans. Finally, the Koreans, they're not as important as the main three up here. However, only about 1,000 Koreans came into the US. Many of them were Christians, and in 1910, Japan annexed Korea, and Korea wasn't able to actually come to the US as much as the other people. They were actually mistreated in Mexico when they were laborers in America, so the Korean government had to send the the Korean laborers back to their own country. And then also for the Hawaiian plantations, a lot of Hawaiian plantations were trying to recruit a lot of laborers into America, but then because Japan thought that Koreans were taking over all their spots in Hawaii plantations, Japan forced them to go back. So those are the four main Asian groups, and I hope you guys gained an understanding of Asian immigrants. Thank you.